Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Tip of the Week. So this week I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the interface. I know we've been talking about some more sort of in-depth and really sort of involved questions, but I thought it was a good time now for us to just take a step back and to go back to the beginning basically, because one thing that I found on my travels is when I go and I talk to people, often they'll know, how to use the product. They'll use the product every day, but there might be some hidden functionalities or some tricks about the interface that they just aren't aware of. And these little handy tricks can really speed up your workflow when you're working with these products. So I thought I'd just go back to the beginning today and do that. And I know that I'm building up a list of things to talk about over the next few weeks that I've gotten as requests from you guys. So there's lots of exciting stuff to come. So I'm going to start today with Storyboard Pro. This is the first time I've opened up Storyboard Pro on Tip of the Week, and I'd love to do more stuff on Storyboard Pro as well. So that's why I thought I'd start out with that today. And most of the stuff that we're going to talk about in Storyboard Pro will also carry over into Animate, Animate Pro, and Harmony. Okay, so let's get started now by looking at Storyboard Pro, and I've got my interface open here on that first workspace, which is the drawing workspace, and that's where I'm going to show you most of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. And the first thing I want to mention with the interface is that there are a few different windows that I have open here at the moment. I mean, by window, I mean these little sections. So I've got a section at the bottom for thumbnail, I've got a section in the middle here for camera, and I've got some sections on the right hand side. And all of these sections are sections that you can create yourself. So let's say, for example, if I hit the X button, that can clear out one of those windows out of there. So I can X, X, X if I want to get rid of a window. If I want to add a new window back in, I can either add the window through my Windows tab at the top, where I can select Windows and then maybe Tool Properties, and it might add it as a floating window, but then you can always take a floating window and you can drag and drop it, and in this case I'll drag and drop it over to the right hand side, which will dock it then on that side. Just like you can dock something in your interface, you can also pull it out. So let's say if I have my Tool Properties window here and I'd like it to be its own window again, I can drag the tab, and if I drag it until it's kind of just a square, that's going to make it a floating window. I can drag it to the bottom if I want things to go like on top of each other. I can drag it to the side. This is something that's really nice about this interface, is this ability to put things basically wherever you want them to be. And I really suggest that when you're getting started with any of our products, that you get your workspace set up in a way that you're comfortable with. And one of the things that has been a response on the Storyboard Pro front is with the advent now of having the new brush tool properties that are sort of the same as what you see in Animate, Line, and Harmony. What happens is you have a color tab and you have a tool properties tab, and these two tabs are separate, and it's a little bit maybe, let's say, annoying to try and adjust those things separately. So one of the things that you can do, though, is you can take either your tool properties or your color and you can just drag it below, and then this way now you can see both the color window and the tool properties window at the same time. And if you do want to go back to the old way, you can also, instead of the color tab, you can choose your brush presets tab, and the brush presets looks a lot more similar to what you would have seen before. So if you've got your brush preset tab at the top here, when you click on one of these, it's going to select that brush preset, which saves all of the tool properties, your minimum size, your maximum size, all of those things, and it also saves the color with it. And then you can have your minimum or you can have your tool properties down here, so you can adjust your minimum maximum size if you need to on the fly. But you have this window at the top that you can click on, which makes it easy to select those brushes right there. Now, one of the other things related to brushes is the concept of being able to modify the size of your brush, and this is true for Animate, Animate Pro, and for Storyboard Pro. So what happens is that when you're using the brush tool, then when you have a tablet and you're using your stylus on your tablet, when you press lightly you get a thin line, and then when you press harder you get a thicker line. And sometimes you want to just be able to visually adjust how thick that line is. And the way of doing that is using the O shortcut. So if I hold down O, while I'm holding down O, I can click and drag, and you can see it gives a circle that's going to show how big the maximum size of my brush will be. And then when I draw with it, when I press hard, that's how wide it will be. If you want to adjust the minimum size, you can also do that as well. And the minimum size can be adjusted with Shift and O. So if I hold down Shift and O at the same time and I drag this out, you see that adjusted the minimum size of my brush. So now even when I press lightly, I have a thicker line, and when I press heavy, I have the thick line that I set with my O shortcut. So, I mean, this is extremely handy. I make use of the O shortcut all the time. I try to set up my brushes so that I have, a rough sizing for the brushes that I want to use, but I use the O shortcut all the time when I'm trying to draw and trying to get things the right size. Now, when you're working with the pencil tool, in the pencil tool, in Storyboard Pro and in Animate Pro, the pencil tool is a line of one thickness. So when you're using the O shortcut to adjust it's actually adjusting internally the maximum size. So that means that the O shortcut, not Shift O, but the regular O shortcut, is going to let you adjust the size of your pencil. When you're working with Storyboard Pro 3D or with Harmony, those products have the thick and thin pencil line, the new True Pencil. So in that case, you still have your minimum and maximum size that you can adjust with the O and the Shift O keys, just like you can with the brush tool. So let's return to the brush tool for a moment because there's some other little tips and tricks here about the brush tool that I want to share with you. So far we've talked about the brush size. What about when you want to draw straight lines? I know you guys probably know that you can use the straight line tool, your line tool. And you can also hold down Shift if you want to move that line tool around in increments. So if you want to get a really nice straight line, you can hold down Shift. You might also want to turn on your snapping, and then you could snap down so you can get almost a perfect rectangle there. And then if you need to adjust that one contour point there, looks like I got rid of my contour editor on my toolbar here. I don't know why I did that. Crazy. Okay, let's put it back up at the top. By the way, when I'm working in Storyboard Pro here, I have enabled the flat toolbar because I like to be able to customize my toolbar in Storyboard Pro. So if you want to customize your toolbar, you can do that, but you just need to make sure that you set it to be a flat toolbar. And that is something that is going to be in, here we go, in Global UI. So if you select Global UI, then there's that flat toolbar and requires relaunch. So that means that when you check this checkbox, you've got to check it, and then you also have to close and reopen the application. And then it's going to just take all of your tools, any tools that were nested. So any tools that when you have a little triangle at the bottom, they will now all just be back at the top. But what this means is that you can right click there and do your customize, and you can select exactly which tools you want showing. So I find that pretty handy, particularly on the Storyboard Pro. I don't use it so much in Harmony, but it's just a personal preference kind of a thing. So now that I have my contour editor there, I can just select this point, and even with your contour editor, you can nudge things with your arrow keys. And you can nudge things in larger increments by holding down Shift while you're using the arrow keys. So, if you wanted to get a perfect box, that's another way of doing it, is just by using your line tool. Now, I wanted to return to the concept, though, of using the brush tool to draw a straight line. If you are using the brush tool and you hold down the Shift key, that will draw a straight line with the brush. If you hold down Shift plus Alt, it will draw a straight line in increments. Now, if you do this, though, I just want to point out that there is a slight difference between using the brush tool to draw a straight line and using the line tool. When you use the line tool, it's a pencil line that has a thickness that you can adjust after you've drawn it with your tool properties. Now, this is not going to be the case when you draw a line with your brush tool, because when you draw a line with your brush tool, it's drawing a brush style line, meaning that the contour points are available on the outside of your line. But the thing that is nice about using the brush tool to draw lines is that you have the ability to enable a texture on it. So if you did want to use, if you are comfortable or familiar using the texture brushes, if you're using the texture brushes and you need to get a straight line, then pretty much the only way of doing that in Storyboard Pro is to draw that line with your brush tool, and then that's how you can get a straight line out of it. So that's just some quick tips now about the brush tool and quick tips about moving around the interface. I showed you how to enable the flat toolbar and how you can customize your toolbar. I just also want to talk to you briefly here about workspaces, and then we'll move over to Animate and Animate Pro. And I should probably also talk to you shortly about shortcuts. So let's do those two things. So I also just want to mention here about workspaces, and that is a workspace is a saved configuration of the window layout. So right now I've been working in the drawing workspace. So the drawing workspace, it automatically saves these workspaces, by the way. So if I adjust my interface while I'm in the drawing workspace, it's going to save those adjustments for the next time I'm in this workspace. If you clicked on a different workspace like the timeline workspace or the thumbnail workspace, now it will bring up that window sort of within that timeline view to show you what that looks like. You can also though create your own custom workspaces, and all of these workspaces at the top save not only the window configuration, by the way, but also which toolbars are showing. So when you're adjusting, if you want to create your own custom workspace, you need to make sure that you have Windows and then Toolbars and the Workspace toolbar on. And then that shows this toolbar over here. And this toolbar then has a drop-down menu of the toolbars that are, or of the workspaces that are available that you can use. And you'll notice that there are some that will look familiar. There's the drawing workspace, the timeline workspace, the overview. These ones all match these buttons over here. So those are your default workspaces that come with Storyboard Pro. And I've also added a new one called Lily, which I think is probably doesn't have anything special in it. I was just showing people how to use the concept of workspace. But what's interesting about this is that if you want to do something that's completely different from these ones, or you don't want to touch these ones when you're making your modifications, then you can always save this one, and that's going to be saved to your user preferences on your machine. So if you click on this Workspace Manager button in the Workspace toolbar, then this will allow you to take any one of these workspaces that you have there, and if you click on the plus sign, it's going to kind of duplicate that workspace, and then you can add it by clicking on the right facing arrow there. You can add it to the list, and if you add it to the list, it will show up in your drop-down list over here. And then when you click apply and OK, when you go back here, now you see that additional workspace here, so you could select the workspace, and then now you can modify it. This is something that perhaps might be useful if you're working in Storyboard Pro 3D, for example, and you want to set up your own custom 3D layout. If you're, if you're having a good way that you like to work with the top view and the stage view and the side view all open at the same time, then you can save your own custom workspace for that purpose, and then you can always access it through this drop-down menu. It's not going to have its own button on the other toolbar over here, but you will always be able to access it from the drop-down list in the Workspace toolbar. So that's the main thing to know about workspaces and being able to save your workspace the way that you want. Now I just want to give you one last little tip about this before we leave Storyboard Pro, and that tip is about the tools on your toolbar and the shortcuts that are associated with those tools. So I just want to pop open Storyboard Pro Preferences, Edit Preferences on Windows of course, and show you that the first tab in here is your Shortcuts tab. And when you're looking in your Shortcuts tab, this is where you can adjust the shortcuts to go with any tool. And you'll see here, and forgive me for being on Mac, which has these funny symbols, but when you're on, when you're in this toolbar, or in this preference window, you'll see that there is a shortcut that's set here. And this shortcut is what they call overridable. And so I want to make sure that you understand what that means, because it's something that is covered in the documentation, but I think is a little bit more difficult to understand without having an explanation of it. So if you hold down Alt and then press B, then what it's going to do is it's going to switch to that tool permanently. But and you notice all of these drawing tools have an Alt. So Alt V is going to flip vertical, and Alt T is going to select your cutter tool, so on and so forth. So all of those shortcuts, when you hold down Alt and press the shortcut for that tool, it's going to permanently switch to that tool. When you are instead just going to hold down the B key, just like when you're using the O key to resize. While you're holding down the O key, you press and you drag. If you do the same thing, and I'll show you over here, let's just select the paint bucket. Okay, I've got my paint bucket selected so I can paint things in. Wonderful. What if I have my paint bucket selected, but I just temporarily want to go to my brush tool? I can hold down B, and as I'm holding down B, while I'm holding it down, it's going to select my brush tool. And when I let go, it's going to go right back to my paint bucket tool. So hopefully you can see why this is useful, because then you can, just do some things, and then you can quickly switch from one tool to another tool. And a lot of people would like to use this, particularly with the paint or the paint on painted tool, because you can be in your brush tool and you can be drawing, and then you can just quickly select your paint bucket, click to paint it, and then go back to your brush tool to continue drawing. And that's particularly useful. So I know some people don't like the overrideable shortcuts because they might be familiar with Flash, which has just the regular B to switch to your brush tool. But I really highly recommend that you try to work with these overrideable shortcuts, because I promise you it will be much faster. Your workflow will be so much faster if you can get to know some of these overrideable shortcuts. So yeah, that's a really good thing to know on that front. And so right before I go to Harmony now, or Animate Pro, because I have finished most of the stuff I wanted to talk about on Storyboard Pro, there's just one last thing, and that is, and let me just turn off the texture on my brush here. I don't want texture on it. Okay. So that you have the ability in Storyboard Pro to use your cutter tool, and if you draw intersecting lines, you can just click on the end of that line, and it's going to select up until the next intersection so that you can hit delete. And this is one of those things that I think that some people didn't know about that exists in the software. I went recently to go and see a studio that was working with our software, and they didn't know this one. So it's slightly different from the mouse gesture that you see in Animate, because when you're using the mouse gesture in Animate, you can actually just swipe your mouse like so. But in this one, what you just have to do is over your intersecting lines there, you can just click. Just a simple left click will select up until the next intersection. So those are the interface highlights that I wanted to show you today for Storyboard Pro, and I'm sure that there are other hidden functionalities and things that I can talk to you about regarding Storyboard Pro, but if they come to me, then I can go back to that later. But for now, let's switch to Animate Pro. Okay, so I've switched over now to Animate Pro, and you'll notice that it's very similar, the concepts here, to what we would have been working with when we were talking about Storyboard Pro. So, for example, we've got these different windows that we can rearrange here. And one other thing that I should mention that I think I forgot to mention when I was talking about Storyboard Pro is these triangles here. And these triangles are something that will allow you to temporarily minimize or maximize a spot on your workspace. So for example, let's say as you're drawing, if you want to temporarily make your camera larger, you can click on the arrow that faces this way, and that's going to just make your window larger. But you can see that there's that triangle that's still over there, so you can always click on the triangle to get it back. So let's say, for example, I might have my workspace set up exactly the way it is right now. I'm drawing, doing whatever, and I want to see more of my X sheet, because my X sheet is a long window, but I've got it kind of stuck up here. I can hide my Tool Properties window there at the bottom to get more room to look at my X sheet at the top, but I can always get my Tool Properties window back. And I think these little triangles are something that I like to use a lot, actually, because I work on a very small computer. I'm working here on a MacBook Air. So the resolution isn't big, and the same thing might be the case if you're working on a Cintiq, because you've got sort of a limited amount of real estate there on your screen. So I think it can be very handy to become familiar with using those triangles and become comfortable with them, so that you don't do it by mistake, but you are always able to, make use of them when you want to make use of them. So then the same things that I showed you on Storyboard Pro will apply here. So if I use my O shortcut, I can change the maximum size of my brush tool. Shift O will let me change the minimum size of my brush tool. And you have also the ability with your brush to hold down the Shift key. And in this case, though, Shift and Alt does something slightly different. Shift and Alt is not going to give you those increments. That's something that was done a little bit more recently. That was done in Storyboard Pro 2. So you'll just have to click on the regular sort of Shift key, but you don't have the ability to do the Shift and the Alt with increments. But that will come in the next version of Animate Pro, and it's also in Harmony at the moment. So you have that ability in Harmony right now. When you're using the line tool, you can hold down Shift, and that will give you the shift with the increments in it. So if you need to get those really perfect edges in Animate Pro, then I would suggest going to your line tool and drawing there with your line tool instead. And you can always get it like that. So, okay, and what else did I mention when I was in Storyboard Pro? I talked about shortcuts. So the same thing that I mentioned with the overridable shortcuts is also going to be the case when we're talking about Animate Pro. So if we go to the preferences for Animate Pro, then in the shortcuts tab, here's where you're going to have all of the shortcuts for your tools. So you've got your brush tool, there's B, close gap tool, and all of the other tools are in here as well. So one of the ones that I mentioned that people like to use a lot is the paint unpainted tool, which I can see right here. So that one I can see is Alt and Y. So, and whenever you see that word overridable, that means that if you press Y without pressing Alt, that it's going to temporarily select that tool. So let's say if I'm in my brush tool and I'm drawing and then I select Y, that's going to bring up my paint unpainted tool while I have Y clicked. So hopefully you guys can see why that's really exciting, I think, as a workflow opportunity there to speed up your process. And now also, you'll notice that there's the workspace toolbar that is pretty much exactly the same as the one that I showed you in Storyboard Pro. So you can take any of these workspaces that are there by default, you can copy them, you can add them to your toolbar there, and then they'll show up there. So you can create your own workspace, and you can customize your workspace to look the way that you want it in Animate and Animate Pro and Harmony. So that's definitely something that I think would be worth taking a few minutes to set up on the front end so that you save the time on the back end. Okay, and then there's one last concept that I want to talk to you about with the Animate line and with Harmony that I didn't talk to you about with Storyboard Pro because it doesn't usually come into play as much, but it does a little bit. And that's the concept of the focus. And I just want to talk about that really quickly because the focus is this red outline that you see around the window, and the red outline will follow me when I click in any of these windows. And so you can be drawing, and then if you want to do something in your timeline, if you select your timeline, now the focus is around my timeline. There are some shortcuts that depend on where the focus is. So for example, that nudging shortcut, the Alt and down arrow, Alt and up arrow, you need to have the focus around your camera view in order for that shortcut to work, because the nudging tools are not going to work in your timeline. So there are a couple of different ways of working with the focus. I personally like to leave focus on mouse enter off, so I leave it the way it is by default. And when I want to get from one window to another, or from another window back to my drawing window, I just hold down the space bar and I click. And I like to do it that way because I know the space bar always brings up the hand. And so for me it's really easy if I select something else, I'm working in the other views, to hold down the hand and then click to get my focus around this window. You can also click in any of the gray space. Okay, so if I click in the gray space in the tool properties in the timeline, or at the top here next to where those tabs are, that's also going to get my focus back in this window. So that's a couple of ways of getting the focus where you want. Now, if those ways are not fast enough for you, or there are a lot of people that prefer focus on mouse enter, so let's talk about that for a second. If I go to my preferences, then you can find this in the general tab. So the focus on mouse enter property, now if I select this option, what it's going to do is you can see that that red outline is now following wherever my mouse is. And I'll just tell you the only reason that I don't use this option that much is that sometimes when I'm working with a tablet, I might put my pen down for a second to type something in if I want to use my keyboard. And when you put your mouse down, it might change the window that your focus is around. So that's the only thing that sometimes I find it slows me down a little bit, but it's really a personal preference thing. If you prefer to work with focus and mouse enter, like most of the people out there, then go ahead and do that. If you don't prefer, then you can use the space bar to get the focus where you want it, or you can click in the gray space at the top of any of those windows. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it back off again because I just like it off. So that's it for our tip of the week this week on the interface. I'm sure that there are many other things that I can think about to share with you regarding the interface. So as I go along in these tips of the week, if there are things that I come across that I think I want to show you or talk to you about regarding the interface, then I'll bring those up as I go. But I wanted to just give a quick overview of that while I was here, because this is something that I think can slow people down if they don't know about the O shortcut, for example, or if they don't know about the cutter tool. And in Animate and Animate Pro, by the way, when you're using your cutter tool, then you also have this option in here called mouse gesture, which is pretty similar to what I was doing in Storyboard Pro, except in this case I can drag a line. And the only things you need to have to make this work is you need to have the lasso on, and you need to have this button depressed. If you don't have the lasso, if you have the marquee, that is automatically going to uncheck itself. It doesn't work with the marquee. So you need to have the lasso on, but with your lasso on you can drag a line across and use it to cut that off. So hope that was useful to you guys, and I will see you next week.